Morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We'll begin with chapter 12, verse 18. Famous story, Avram and Sarai go down to Egypt because there was a famine in Israel. They go to Egypt, and Sarai was a uniquely beautiful woman, and she's taken for Paro, the king of Egypt. And Avram's general strategy was to present himself as Sarai's brother, as opposed to husband, because he was concerned that people would be so interested in her that they would just kill him. So Paro didn't realize that he was taking a married woman. And all of a sudden, we read in verse 17, by the way, I should mention it's going to be relevant later on this morning, that they gave all these assets to Avram as sort of the price, so to say, of taking his sister's hand in marriage. And now in verse 17, chapter 12, verse 17, so Hashem brought upon Paro great afflictions and upon his household, Aldvar Sarai Avram, because of the matter of Sarai. Okay, so Paro takes Sarai as a wife, and Paro becomes ill. Verse 18, Vayikra Pharaoh Avram. In the aftermath of Paro becoming ill, Paro calls to Avram, Vayomer, and he says to him, Mazosa Sisali, what did you do to me? Lama lo igadatali ki ishtechahi. Why didn't you tell me that she was your wife? Verse 19, Lama marta achosihi vo'ekachosali lisha va'atoi ne'ishtecha kach v'lech. Why didn't you tell me she was your wife? Why'd you say she was your sister? And that caused me to take her as a wife. Here, take your wife and go. Now, this is really impressive. Paro really has his spiritual frequency attuned. You know, he has some illness, and he says, it must be that I did the wrong thing by taking Sarai, and it must be that she's really a married woman. This is like very impressive. I wish I was as spiritually attuned as Paro. I mean, how did he know? This is pretty good. Ramban, by the way, just sometimes it's confusing. Paro was the generic term for the king of Egypt. So this is not the same Paro as the Exodus story. He does not seem to be nearly as astute. But the Ramban in Pasuk Yud Ches, Vayikra Pharaoh Avram, Yitachin, Kivavo anagoyim pitom alav v'albeso be'esa sheluk chasara elbeso here b'daito lemur mazosa sa elukim lan v'shoalosa v'gidu ki ishto v'lochein kara l'Avram v'hashimosa. So the first possibility the Ramban raises is it could have been the timing, that it came utterly out of nowhere, and it was immediate upon his bringing Sarai into his house. So he began to think there was some connection, and then he inquired with Sarai, and she said, "Well, to be honest with you, I'm a married woman." So it is perceptive of Paro, but it was based on the timing. That's the first possibility. And then also the Ramban is explaining not only how Paro understood the connection, but how Paro understood specifically that actually Sarai was married to Avram. It's because he asked her, said, "What's going on here? There's something having to do with you that I did wrong," or something that she explained to him. Further in the Ramban, O kasher amru rabosenu shalaka b'rasan shamishkal kashalov. There's a medrash that says, and the medrash is clearly addressing this question. There's a medrash that says that the illness that came upon him made sexual intercourse physically difficult to do. So, you got to ask yourself, I bring in this new wife who's like a little bit mysterious. Presumably he understood that they were spiritual people, and all of a sudden I have this issue with intercourse. It doesn't take a genius to make the connection. And so he was worried, maybe Sarai is married. According to this pshat, says the Ramban, when Paro confronts Avram, he's actually taking a shot in the dark. In other words, he doesn't know if she's married to Avram, but he just asks him, he kind of takes a bet that he's right, that his assumption is right, and kind of pushes Avram on it, and he's right. Because it would be very clear that he already would have interjected. What do you mean she's my sister? In fact, he didn't interject, she's my sister. That's what gives Paro the instinct to keep on going. And then, by the way, when he says to them so firmly, and now here's your wife, take her and go. It's a pretty interesting thing to say to someone who's not married to this woman. Right? So according to the first shot, the Ramban said he knew it for a fact. It's all right, told. According to the second shot, he's just putting it out there and seeing what happens. Let's see what Avram's reaction to that is going to be. The Avram shasak mimenu, and Avram was quiet. And Avram didn't respond. It actually is very, very striking. Avram doesn't say anything to him. Why doesn't Avram say anything to him? Because he was so afraid of Paro. So then Paro understood that indeed she was Avram's wife. So then Paro had them escorted out. So these are two possibilities the Ramban raises. Interesting to think about that. Let's jump ahead to chapter 13, verse 1. It's really just a couple psukim later. Bayal Avram Mitzrayim. Avram came up from Egypt. So Avram, his wife, it's interesting, it's referred to as his wife, and everything that he had, along with Lot, they left Egypt. Now, why does the pasuk have to say all of that? If I were to ask you, quick, guess, did Lot and Sarai and whoever came with Avram, whatever was with Avram, did they leave Egypt with him? Isn't that what you would have assumed happened? So really interesting Ramban over here. Ramban on pasuk Aleph. Tam huvish dovachol asher lo dia shlo gazlu mimenu davar mikol hamatanos hagdolos shenasnu lo bavur Sarah shetiyeh lemelech. We mentioned a moment ago that they gave Avram all kinds of gifts because they wanted his agreement that his sister should marry Paro. Well, now his wife is not marrying Paro. You could very well imagine that they would take it all back, right? They didn't say, you lied to us. You maybe not lied to us, but you misled us, and it was gifts under false pretense. We're taking it back. So the pasuk is emphasizing not just that Avram and Sarai and Lot went, but everything that he had before Paro confronted him, he still had. Says the Ramban, V'zeh maseh nes. This is a miracle. Now, I want to just, I hear that the Ramban says it's a miracle. You try going through a Middle East shuk, getting something questionable from a salesman and seeing if they just shrug their shoulders and say, sure, why don't you keep it? That makes sense. But I guess what I think is worthy of reflecting on for a moment is, why is this such an exciting thing? Why is this so important that this miracle occur? And I think if you think about it for a moment, it's a very important point. God assured Avram that if he went on this journey, he'd be blessed in all kinds of ways, and one of them was with great wealth. Now, what does Avram have to show for himself right now? They went to Israel. It was a famine. They went down to Egypt. So, even though, and then there was this whole chaos with Sarai and Paro, so if you're Avram at this moment, it would be understandable if you're scratching your head a little bit, trying to understand where things are coming from and where the prizes are going to start coming. God said this was going to happen, that was going to happen. So I think this is an amazing moment where, despite the chaos of the Egyptian experience, there's this real miracle that they walk away with all this wealth and no one complained about it. And this is sort of, it seems to be a little tap on the shoulder from God, that this is just the beginning of the fulfillment of the promises that I've assured you. So I just think it's an interesting thing to think about. I think there's a Muslim life for that so many times when we think we have this problem, we think we have that problem, so many times, things that we see as problematic actually end up being real blessings in disguise. So it's an interesting thing to reflect on. Okay. So they move along, they've gone back to the land of Israel, they now have food to eat and everything like that. And we have now verse 5. It wasn't only Avram that had assets, Lot also had assets now. He had sheep, cattle, tents. Verse 6, the land didn't allow them to dwell together. Because they had a lot between the two of them, they had a lot. There wasn't sufficient room for them. Verse 7. There was an argument between the shepherds of Avram and the shepherds of Lot. And the Kanani and Prizi were then living there. Okay, what was the argument about? It's not clear. All it says is there was an argument. And why in the world does the pasuk end off by saying the Kanani and Prizi, which were nationalities living in Israel, why is this relevant that the Kanani and Prizim were living there at the time? What's this about? So let's start with Rashi. Rashi on pasuk Zayin, Vayhiriv. Fishoyuroav Shalot Shoyim. The shepherds of Lot were wicked. Umarim behemtam b'sados acherim. They would allow their sheep to graze in the fields of others. V'roi Avram mochichem osam ala gezel. And Avram shepherds would say to them, hey, that's not right. You can't take other people. We can only allow our sheep to graze in land that belongs to us, or maybe if it doesn't belong to us, just general land. The shepherds of Lot said, well, look, God already said the land is going to go to Avram. And we all know that who's going to be Avram's heir when it's all over? Lot, because Avram doesn't have any kids. So Lot's going to be the next of kin. So the land is as good as Avram's, and Avram's not going to live forever. So that means by extension, the land is as good as Lot's. So this isn't theft. That says the Medrash. It's why the pasuk ends off that the Kananim and Prisim were living there at the time, meaning Avram hadn't claimed the land yet, which means this really was theft, and it really was fundamentally inappropriate. Right? So that's so in the reconciling the fact that the Kananim and Prisim were there, and the fact that there was this fight, and we had just said in the previous pasuk there wasn't enough land. We put it all together to assume the argument was over the ethics of where Lot's shepherds were allowing their animals to graze. That's what Rashi says. Ramban and pasuk Zayin. Okay, so the first 5 lines or so he quotes Rashi, and then he says Vani Tama. And I have a question on this. You know, like, what do you mean? If Lot was listening so well to what God said to Avram, or heard what God, heard it said what God said to Avram, what God said to Avram is that I'm going to give the land to your offspring. God didn't say to Avram, I'm giving you the land. He said, I'm giving your offspring the land. So, like, was he listening or was he not listening? If he was listening, he should understand God says explicitly it's to Avram's offspring. And if he wasn't listening, so what makes him think the land is going to be Avram's? Ulai shamu haroim hamatana v'ta'u. So he says maybe the shepherds got wind of this assurance from God, and they made a mistake. And they misunderstood what it all meant. And they thought it just meant that it'll be to your heirs, and that's Lot. V'akasav omer ki gam l'Lot, gam l'Avram, einanu ata. I mean, the pasuk is saying that neither one of them owned the land at this time. Like we explained, that the pshat is that there wasn't sufficient land, and that's why the shepherds of Lot felt pressure to take their animals else, on places that belong to other people. And the Ramban says it must be the shepherds didn't know the gift so well from God. They didn't fully understand it. The derech hapshat haisam riva ala mire kilo naso samaretz kasher haya mikne Avram roe be'achu haya roe Lot boim b'kvulam v'roim sham. The Ramban says, there could be a more direct pshat here. We don't have to say this medrash. We could say that there just really wasn't room. Whenever Avram's shepherds would take a spot, next thing they knew, Lot's shepherds were there too. V'nei Avram v'Lot hayu gerim v'toshavim ba'aretz. Avram and Lot did not. This wasn't their land. Upachad Avram pen yishmak nani ba'prisha yoshev haaretz koved mikneim v'garshum. Says the Ramban. The reason it says at the end of the pasuk the Kananim and the Prisim lived there is because Avram was nervous that the residents, not that they were stealing from anyone, but the residents would get nervous that they had so many livestock there that they would expel them. So Avram felt, listen, we can't be together. Wherever I go, you're showing up behind me, and there's this huge mass. We're going to make the neighbors nervous. So that's the pshat. So we have Rashi's very famous pshat, and the Ramban suggests this other possibility. So we discussed this morning how Paro knew that the issue of his illness had to do with Sarai's marital status. We discussed the Ramban regarding the miracle of Avram getting to keep the gifts he was given in Egypt, and we discussed Rashi and the Ramban regarding the dispute between Lot and Avram.